Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you back to Geopolitics East and West. Myself, Adil Raja, with my guest, Theo-A-Mullis. We talk about the geopolitical issues from East and West, and today we would be talking about in the Iran war in the East, the blockade, which was supposed to be a complete blockade until it was not, because as the saying goes, and as the memes go, that Trump always chickens out. That is what is being talked about, and because of that, there is a severe loss of the U.S. soft power. And China is the obvious winner over here. We'll be talking about that because there are serious issues being raised on ground. The panicked U.S. hotels are slashing room rates for the World Cup, amid a demand shortfall. That is definitely the loss of the U.S. soft power and a surge in anti-American sentiment. And most important of all, we would be talking about the Hungarian elections where Orban lost, irrespective of him being supported by the major macho mans of the world at the global stage, including Trump. So I welcome Theo, and Theo, let's straight away jump into it, and let's get your views about the Hungarian elections before we go to Taco and before we go to the U.S. politics and Iran war. What is going on in Hungary and what happened in Hungarian elections? I mean, we believed Orban would have won. I mean, he had a lot many powerful people supporting him. What happened there?
So Viktor Orbán was in power for 16 years, and he has built a state. He used to call it an illiberal democracy. But in reality, it's the kind of oligarchy that we come to see in growing in the United States, and it's much less severe. But you see it in Russia as well, and he painted himself as a populist, as a man for the people. And the thing is, with populism, you have to maintain that view. But when you become the elites that you rail against, when you are the guy who has pet zebra and an enormous mansion, when your best friend, who used to be, I think it was a plumber, becomes the richest man in the country, people begin to start asking questions. And Peter Mayer, the chap who's now won the elections, and his Tishka party, used to be a member of Orbán's Fidesz party until about 2 years ago. And he has been relentless in his campaign. Bear in mind, he couldn't get television spots. He couldn't get out there in the media because all the media was owned by Orbán's friends. A lot was stacked against him. So what he did was literally travel from town to town to town in person. There's a map, I don't have it in front of me, but of the towns and cities visited by Orbán versus Mayer in this election, and it's completely different. Mayer was everywhere. So he had the weight of Orbán's 16 years and his control of significant state apparatus against him. And there were questions at some point whether a false flag attack would be staged on pipelines. And Orbán's campaign was very heavily focused on Zelensky, on von der Leyen. A vote for Mayer, a vote against me means your children will be fighting on the front lines of Ukraine, which is patently ridiculous. Mayer has been a very significant shift. There's a 90 billion euro loan that the EU has put forward, has voted for to send to Ukraine so they can continue their fight against Russian imperialism. And Orbán was always blocking this. And there is evidence come out that Orbán's foreign minister was in direct communications with the Russians, and that Orbán once described himself to Vladimir Putin as a mouse to Putin's lion, and would be at service in whatever way he could. So he was very much considered by many in Europe to be a mole, a fifth column on the part of the Russian camp. And the fact that he's out, and the fact that it was such a landslide, Maya's party now has a supermajority, and they can roll back a lot of these undemocratic reforms that Fidesz and Orbán put in place in the last 16 years. But it was such a landslide that it was, to use Trump's words, too big to steal.
Too big to steal.
So no, yeah, it is very significant. That $90 billion
I believe
euros.
I believe
now going to get.
I believe if Orbán had taken lessons from Trump's favorite field marshal in Pakistan, he would have been able to steal the mandate. That's not a big deal.
I don't think so.
Not in Europe.
I mean, I think he would have tried, but then you have all of these neighboring countries who will not want a dictatorship to be part of their club, basically, and would simply not be allowed. Measures would be put into place. I don't know what, and it would be an open question because it's sort of an outside context problem. So it'd be something that it'd be a real challenge if that were to actually occur. However, it hasn't. He has conceded. So now the new, Fidesz, the new Tisza party is going to be, I think, fairly similar in some respects, in terms of social policy. They're still a right-wing party. This isn't like many people in Europe thought this, Peter Mayer is not a left-wing individual, still very socially conservative, but closer to the European project and supportive of Ukraine. And these are two very important things because Ukraine is Europe's great challenge of this century.
Very interesting. So let's see how it goes. But moving on. Well, let's talk about Taco. Trump always chickens out. And I've done a lot of programs about it by the author of Trumpetopia, Rabinder Sachdev. And he's been talking a lot about it, but it'll be interesting to know your perspective. With regards to Iran war, where he said that there'll be a naval blockade, but the Chinese ships passed through. He's finding it hard to convince the American themselves that he has won the war. Obviously, the US has got a military advantage, but a strategic advantage definitely has been lost. It is not with Iran, it is with China, for sure. And under the circumstances, the US is losing its soft power. And the American themselves consider, as per the latest surveys, I was reading about it today, American consider China, previously in the last 2 years ago, before the Trump presidency began, American considered China to be, 46% of American considered China to be their top enemy. Now 26% only say that China is our top threat. So they don't see it as a threat. And at the same time, there is a rise of anti-American sentiment around the world, because of which the US hotels, the big World Cup is going on, the Football World Cup, they call it soccer, I believe, but it is going to happen in the US. And the panicked hotels are slashing the rates because mostly the Europeans, they will travel over there. And but there is a huge anti-American sentiment in Europe, the traditional allies, and they're not part of Trump's war on Iran as well. So what's actually going on? Is it China winning strategically, or is it Trump who is the disaster what Iran war strategically and for the PR image of Trump is at home, and while he's banking on a military dictator in Pakistan who's, let me say it quite openly, hated by his own people, Asim Munir, to go and be his chief mediator. Well, the entire world is on the hinge. We know that it's just short of a precipice. So we do need peace. Peace is the logical way forward. But under the circumstances, what do you think? Has US lost the PR, the public relationing part of it, the strategically? Has the US lost its soft power or continue to lose the soft power because of this war and because of Israel pushing it into this war? Let's not talk about that if you don't want to talk about it, but definitely this is the Daily Beast reporting it. So how do you analyze this entire scenario?
So let's focus on the hotels and on the World Cup. Yes, the United States has lost its draw. People are not traveling there. And these are people who would. And the most significant, I guess, demographic and most significant nation isn't Europe in this regard. The Europeans are, numbers have dropped significantly, but it's Canada. America's northern trading partner. And since everything Trump has done, referring to the Canadian Prime Minister as governor, saying you're going to be the 51st state, whether you like it or not, more or less. Same things he's done to Europe vis-a-vis Greenland. Canadians are not buying.
And sorry to cut you short. They say, sorry to cut you short. They say that UK is the 52nd state. The Americans. Yeah.
Okay. Canadians are not buying American products. Canadians are not traveling to the United States, where previously it was the logical place for many of them to go on holiday to get to the sun if they wanted to. And the same is the case with Europeans. I mean, you hear horror stories of tourists being detained by ICE. You hear that if your nation is on the ESTA visa waiver program, which most of Europe and of course Canada is, or I'm not sure if Canada is maybe on something different due to North American free trade, but you may now have to submit 5 years of social media records. So that they can make sure that you haven't been mean about the president, and it's patently ridiculous. And you can see individual states, billboards and stuff advertising, "Hey, come visit California, come visit New York, Texas, wherever." And these are up in where I live in London, but people aren't going. The numbers are dropping, and Trump's behavior is certainly the reason for this. People don't want to travel to the United States because it's not seen anymore as a safe place to go. It's seen as a place where you might get snatched off the street by ICE, and it's seen as more and more unfriendly. In Canada and in Europe as well. But Canada's really the significant one because Canadians and Americans, used to travel back and forth all the time. Now that is less and less and less, and the numbers are sort of relatively significant. February this year marked a 14.5% year-over-year decline in Canadian residents returning to from the US. WestJet suspended, so that's an airline, suspended 16 Canada to US routes due to dropping demand, and overseas travel by air from Canada to other countries has increased by 7.2%. But the decline is really significant, and it is affecting American tourism industries. Cities like Las Vegas, the big casino town, are experiencing declines, and this is because of Trump's behavior and because of his disastrous economic policies. So yes, the United States is losing soft power because it's no longer seen as a bit mad in some ways, but relatively stable, and it's a democracy of sorts. It's now seen as completely unstable and run by a man who is a weak, unhinged bully. And his behavior and his actions in Iran are indicative of a man who does not understand what he has gotten himself into.
So, Theo, how do you see this situation developing for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance? And there's a war going on in Ukraine as well, and America is deeply involved there. So how do you see this transatlantic alliance moving forward under the circumstances?
Well, Trump has spoken out against NATO ever since he traveled to Moscow in the 1980s for some money. And he continues to do so. Right now is NATO's probably biggest challenge, and it is very significant. If NATO were to break up, then the security of certainly Europe and of the United States would be at risk. I mean, the Americans seem to forget that, at least, the MAGA Americans seem to forget that Europe contributes an enormous amount to NATO. They quote these billions and billions of dollars that we put into NATO figure. That's just their defense spending. And they forget the basing rights that they have. all over Europe. Can you imagine, as a hypothetical, if every American base in Europe were to be closed by this time next year, and how American power projection would look compared to how it is now? Significantly degraded, I think it's fair to argue. So NATO is at risk, and it would be a bad thing from my perspective if it were to fall. But I think that there are moves that recognize this, and a greater push towards things like a common European army.
All right, just a follow-up question from our last program. We talked about Pope being attacked by Trump and his team, actually. Yeah. And Pope is now being attacked by Trump's MAGA camp, not the MAGA camp, which is actually the MAGA camp, which is the working class of the USA, the MAGA camp, which comes to the prayers meeting in the White House, and Trump trying to portray himself as Jesus, and later on backbreaking. I mean, it's quite obvious in that picture that he's portraying himself as Jesus Christ, all right? But now he says he was acting as a doctor, maybe, and it was a support of the Red Cross. But this situation developed where Trump is being tried to portray as a religious figure. I mean, how do you see it playing as a Christian?
Well, for clarification, I grew up Christian. I don't know if I describe myself as one now, but it is a very significant blasphemy to portray yourself as Christ, and it's very obvious that is what that was. It is an insult to every believing Christian around the world, and his attacking of the Pope, and not just him. You've got J.D. Vance saying that the Pope should be careful when he talks about theology. The Pope should be careful when he talks about theology. And this is from J.D. Vance, who is a Catholic. The Pope could do something very funny there, but I don't think he will. So no, it's indicative of Trump's malignant narcissism. And this is a view into this man's head. This is how he sees himself, and he cannot fathom why other people don't see him like this. And for those wondering, how is this like Jesus? I mean, it's mostly in the clothes, and the holding of the light and the healing of the sick man who does look a little bit like Jeffrey Epstein. I don't think that's intended, but it is quite fun.
People have put out memes out there, but in which the sick man has been replaced by Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah.
And there's an F-35 for some reason. The Prince of Peace, not exactly known for fighter jets. Although, of course, it has been misused repeatedly in the past. There have been plenty of violent Christian sects. And this is what MAGA Christianity is. It is a kind of Christianity that focuses very much on the Old Testament and Leviticus, Deuteronomy, etc., rather than anything in the New Testament, anything that Jesus actually said. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the world, that kind of thing, So it's a blasphemy. It's indicative of his narcissism, and it is probably going to hurt him very significantly in the midterm elections, because you now have Catholic leaders saying you ought to write to your representative. And when that happens, when the Holy See starts getting involved in politics like that, certain countries are quite susceptible because of their large Catholic populations. Italy, of course, being the big one, Poland, another one. But the United States is also that. The United States has a very large Catholic population. Lots of Irish and Italian immigrants during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And they maintain their Catholicism. The Americans are generally more religious than Europeans. So to insult Christ is is quite interesting. We'll have to see how it's going to work out for him.
So let's see. I mean, how MAGA camp, responds to it. But moving to a serious issue, the final issue actually we're discussing today. I mean, last week, Daily Mail gave this opinion, and they said that Iran has won and Trump has lost. His war has only emboldened the regime, a new generation of terrorists. That's what Daily Mail is saying. Fine. But what is your view, considering that United States military, U.S. CENTCOM, announced a blockade of the Persian Gulf and and the Iranian coastline actually, and the Chinese, they in fact violated that blockade, and the blockade violated quite regularly through spoofing the signals identity of the ships. So that is also an issue of credibility for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military. That's there, fine. But at the same time, President Trump, he is banking now, officially banking on a military dictator hated among his own people, his own country, and trying to portray him as a hero. That is Asim Munir, and he's shuttling between Tehran, Washington D.C., and Islamabad as well. So if the U.S., the mighty U.S. empire, if I may say, is banking upon a military dictator from Pakistan to bring some kind of an agreement in their favor, and he is being seen as the messenger for the Trump administration, what is the future of this conflict?
Far from the first time in history that a large power has had to rely on an unpleasant leader of a smaller power to get something done. But what is the trajectory of this conflict? If this conflict had a planned out trajectory, then we'd be having a very different conversation. The problem with trying to map this, and this is a problem that journalists have when trying to talk about Trump, and I think Vlad Vexler described this as sane washing. They try to say, oh, but what's Trump's plan here? He doesn't have a plan. What's the trajectory? I don't know, to be honest, because he doesn't know. There is no thought out strategic thinking going on with this individual. So yes, I think the Daily Mail does have it right. Iran has won. The regime has been hardened, and that is not good. The Iranian regime, much like the Pakistani regime, is despised by its people. They've carried
not
out
all of them. Not all of them. Not all of them.
Well, you could say the same about the Pakistani regime. Not all of them.
90% of them. So the numbers
are. I would say the same about the Iranian regime. I know. I've been talking to. So I interviewed Zalal Habibi, who's worked all of her life. She lives in exile because the Iranians executed her. Well, the Iranian regime executed her father, and she is, from the Iranian resistance movements, and they are really stuck between a rock and a hard place because they despise the regime. They want the regime to fall. But the people who are saying, yeah, we want the regime to fall, are also the people who were backing, bombing it with no plan and, no sense moving forward. And the people who are saying, oh, we're against the bombing, which she is against the bombing, are waving the regime flags and praising the Ayatollah, etc. So there is such a problem with nuance when it comes to Iran that the people who are losing out the most are the people of Iran who are getting killed by the Americans, by the Israelis, and by their own regime. They are stuck between three horrible groupings who are using them and killing them.
Yeah, but Theo, in all fairness, once President Trump threatens to wipe out Iranian civilization, nobody in his or her right mind would support that kind of a rhetoric.
No, of course not. Of course not. That's a given. Yeah, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of genocidal, evil rhetoric, has no place being uttered by any leader of the world, let alone the self-proclaimed leader of the free world.
All right. So, final question to you: there is a pattern to the Pakistani dictators, working for the U.S. deep state or the U.S. presidents, starting with Ayub and Kennedy, Zia and Reagan, Musharraf and Bush, Yahya and Nixon was before that, and now Munir and Trump, with Munir being Trump's favorite field marshal. Fine, but at the same time, Pakistan is deeply aligned with the Chinese. And it is an open secret that Pakistan is playing a double game as per the US admission. Afghanistan.
Well, the Americans have known this for this has been sort of well known that the Pakistani government has long been playing both sides, and the only way you can really describe the relationship between the US and Pakistan is occasional allies of convenience / frenemies. I like frenemies; it's a good term.
Yeah,
but
frenemies,
they'll do business. They know that each side is going to try to get one up on the other. But let's not forget the Americans also they want to play both sides between Pakistan and India.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, because they're selling arms to both sides.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. So, very interesting situation. At the end of the day, it is about national interest or military-industrial complexes interest, not about or personal relationship. Because the Pakistani dictator wants legitimacy because of the support of Washington D.C. He'll be able to keep the Pakistani generals in line, saying that listen, the U.S. is supporting me, so that works for him. And if Trump has given the Trump administration is provided with this face-saving, peace deal or face-saving narrative by the Pakistani dictator Rasim Munir, so works for him as well. So I believe it's a win-win situation then.
For the individuals, yes. For the countries, less so. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said personal relationships. I think Mr. Munir, or Field Marshal Munir, whatever you want to call him, has really hit the nail on the head when it comes to Donald Trump, and identified the correct way in that it's all about, with Trump, it's all about the personal relationship. Can he call up the phone and say, hey, Donald, we'll get this Iran thing sorted out. Don't worry, we'll get you out of there. If he can do that, and if he can then deliver, well, then he's going to get very favorable dealings with the United States moving forward. So yeah, no, it's about great power politics. There's no ideology at the heart of American strategic thinking in this administration. There is only what can you do for the Trump family.
That's true. That's the brutal truth, and that's what the world is witnessing, and that's why there is a rise of anti-American sentiment, and that's why the World Cup situation is developing the way it is developing. So let's wrap it up for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much for staying tuned, and please give us your valuable comments. You are watching this. It's a collaboration between Soldier Speaks English, Soldier Speaks Reloaded, and Dictators We Democrats. Please subscribe to both the channels, especially Dictator We Democrats. You'll find the link in the description. It is a collaboration, as I've already told you. See you very soon. And thank you. Thank you to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.